The motionless moon stands frozen in the sky, filling the silent house with a ghostly light, and only somewhere deep below, in the damp semi-darkness of the basement, a lonely guard stands without closing his eyes. Behind the locked gates, things are not as calm as outside, and something is clearly going on. "What did you say?" the girl asked again, surprised. The young man, with a flushed face and an unbuttoned shirt, said with difficulty that the lady should not approach him. The girl was taken aback. The situation was quite unusual, if only because this young man is holding her hand, and too tightly. At that moment he grimaced as if he was in great pain, and then began to cough. The girl noticed his condition and worriedly asked if he was okay. Her voice made him shudder and look at her with surprise and some hope in his eyes, as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Lady, touch me," the young man breathed out. The girl froze. Everything was too unclear. And the man had already pulled her hand so that the girl pressed herself against his chest. "Listen, you can't do it so suddenly," was all she could say, feeling her heart pounding and her throat dry. But the man did not listen to her. He took her hand and put it to his cheek. When the girl's small palm gently touched his cheek, the young man seemed to feel relief, instantly relaxing and seemingly languishing from the pleasant feeling. Seeing his condition, the girl could not pull her hand away. Her touch brought him relief. Sitting on the floor of her cell at night, hugging the prisoner, she thought only about how this had happened. Just recently, she opened her eyes and found herself in a completely unfamiliar place. There were people around. She herself was standing with a broom in her hands, and the reflection in the large window showed a beautiful girl with pink hair and in a maid's uniform. "Rosie," someone called right into her ear, and the girl jumped in surprise, not understanding who this red-haired girl was. And she took the broom from her hands and reproached her for being late. And then she ordered him to quickly go down to the basement because it was her turn to feed the monster, stunning him with her words. Rosie vaguely remembered something. Somewhere she had already heard about the monster and its feeding, but she could not remember where exactly. Then they thrust a tray of food into her hands, placed in a dog bowl, and hurried her along, saying that the virtue of a maid is to obey orders without complaint. As Rosie walked down to the basement, she wondered if the dog looked like a monster and hoped he wasn't creepy. In the end, she decided to leave these thoughts behind. First, she needed to understand where she was. The girl stopped in front of the gate, locked with a massive chain. The girl stopped, waiting for the guard to turn the key and open the gate. "Put it down quickly and go away," said the gatekeeper, opening the gate. The gates closed behind her, and Rosie, feeling the chills of this eerie place, was planning to throw down her food and run. Having put the bowl of food on the floor, the girl rushed back to the gate, trying to get out of there before anyone else came out. A red light came on in a dark corner of the chamber. Sensing prey, the monster opened its eyes. With a sharp movement, he threw his hand forward and grabbed the girl by the leg. Rosie turned around in fear and saw a very human figure, and then blue eyes that looked straight at her. Rosie had a hard time realizing that this was not an animal, but a person. The man who was desperately clinging to her legs and saying something. Unable to recover from the shock, the girl wondered if this man could be a monster. "Please, please give me the medicine," the man said barely audibly. He doubled over in pain and added that he hadn't taken his medicine for several days, literally begging her to help. To the girl, he looked like an ordinary person, but for some reason they called him a monster, and it seemed that he was very sick. So, having promised to help, she asked where to get the medicine, and the man immediately answered that she had it in her inside pocket. Rosie reached into her own pocket in surprise, and with no less surprise, she took out a small bottle from there and asked if this was it. Yes, rather a medicine. The man's eyes, like a mirror, reflected the coveted object. At that moment, another maid called out to Rosie she was worried, so she decided to check on her. "Have you really been bewitched by this monster? Have you forgotten that you can't give him medicine without the master's permission?" the girl said indignantly. She hurried to take Rosie out of the cell. If she stayed there, the monster would completely bewitch her. Rosie turned to look at the young man, feeling some regret he was still sitting on the floor, hiding his face behind his hand. It was clear that he was feeling unwell. Then the girl decided that whatever happened, she made an instant decision. She opened her palm, which contained a bottle of medicine, which fell with a light thud onto the floor of the cell and rolled towards the prisoner. As soon as the object touched his knee, the man raised his blue eyes in surprise. Rosie mentally asked him to take the medicine secretly. Little did she know that her decision would lead to this man turning out to be a terrible, possessive man in the future and becoming forever attached to her, vowing never to let her go. The maids walked silently down the corridor, returning to their duties. "Rosie, are you really under the spell of that monster?" the red-haired girl asked sharply. To her friend looked very strange, ever since she started feeding that monster all in her thoughts. But Rosie just laughed embarrassedly. She was just thinking. The handsome man who was called a monster, and the servants who were enchanted by this place reminded her of something. It was exactly like a novel she knew that was once popular. The title of this novel is Reborn in the Mist. In the world of this novel, there are creatures called Transcendentals, people blessed by God and possessing powers beyond human capabilities. But they were completely different from ordinary people. However, there was a price to pay. Terrible pain. Their ordinary bodies could not withstand ordinary blood, and they suffered from pain as if lava was flowing in their veins. Richard from this novel was also a transcendentalist, but when his power weakened, Arjan, the protagonist, kidnapped him. He put restraints on Richard and did not give him the magic power suppressor that restrained the magic circuit, but in the end, Richard managed to escape and went to the battlefield. It seems that was roughly the content. The red-haired maid actively pushed Rosie towards her room, asking her to have a good rest and get some sleep. But the girl suddenly realized that she had mentioned a certain gentleman and asked who she was talking about. And when my friend replied that Rosie was acting strangely and that she was only talking about the Marquis Avantes Arjan, I thought again. Marquis Avantes, this name is also one of the characters in Raised by the Mist. Is this really the world of that novel? "This won't do, Rosie. Don't stick your nose out today and rest. I'll keep watch at the door," said the maid, and closed the door from the other side, wishing her good night. But Rosie felt that she was not at all tired. It was a dark night, and she had nothing to do, so she climbed into bed, deciding that when she woke up, it would all turn out to be a dream. The morning on the huge estate was sunny and fresh, unlike Rosie, whose face expressed the exact opposite. What kind of dream is this? If this is really the world of that novel, then things are bad. A maid who serves a monster well during meals for 10 days becomes his personal maid. And with such a personal maid, every time the monster tries to escape, her head is cut off. But Richard does not give up trying to become free, and her trouble is not far away. "Maid, you've come again." As soon as she stepped into the cell, the prisoner raised his blue eyes to her, and it seemed he was genuinely glad to see her. The look on the young man's face as he greeted her made the girl freeze in place in shock. Still sparkling like a diamond, he asked what had happened that made her freeze, and the girl replied that nothing, although she herself felt extremely awkward. "Ever since yesterday, I've been thinking about how to thank you for your kindness," he said, and Rosie couldn't help but notice that he was stunningly handsome. She replied that there was no need to thank her. She had brought food, so he should just eat. Richard looked calmly at the dog bowl full of empty rice. And then he smiled sweetly and seemed to sincerely thank me for the food he brought. The girl looked at him skeptically. Few people would thank him for food brought in a dog bowl. Richard in the original is by no means a good character, although now he behaved differently. He hated everyone in this estate and did not feel an ounce of guilt, even when the servants assigned to him lost their heads. Yet he is kind to Rosie because she has something to give him, namely a magic suppressor. It was given to the maids by Arjan himself to prevent accidents when Richard was in a fit of severe pain. The girl thought that since this was a microscopic dose, it would only prevent a seizure but would hardly affect the pain. "Maid, I'm finished with the food, so you better leave. You need to eat too," said the prisoner, showing the empty bowl. Rosie took the bowl, relieved that nothing had happened and there was no sign that he particularly liked her. She hoped to hold out like this for the remaining 9 days and noticed too late what was happening behind her. Meanwhile, Richard came up close to the girl and hugged her from behind. Rosie turned around in alarm, indignant that he was doing this. But the man said that he was curious about something, and he persistently but very carefully took her hand. Raising the girl's hand by the wrist to his face, he began to sniff the skin. "Do you use perfume? You always have a pleasant aroma," he asked, his blue eyes sparkling. This question surprised the girl. Why all of a sudden? But then she realized with horror that he could not approach her like that because of the chain. The chains that restricted the monster's movements around the chamber were broken. But when did he manage to do this? "Maid, may I ask what perfume you use?" He repeated his question, looking at the girl with a smile. Rosie was seriously scared. She was alone with the monster who was not chained and was simply holding her. She was trapped, but if she pushed him away, she would arouse suspicion. While thinking about what to do, the girl inadvertently relaxed her hands, forgetting that she was holding a tray. The metal object fell to the floor with a clatter, drawing attention to itself in the ensuing silence, which was rather awkward. "Oh, my head is spinning." Rosie suddenly leaned back as if she was about to lose consciousness. She pretended to explain to Richard that she had anemia and hadn't taken her pills. The girl tried to act naturally, and to check his reaction, she opened her eyes slightly. Her interlocutor was a cruel man, and in theory he should not be concerned about women fainting, and then, perhaps, death had already come for her. "Didn't take your medicine?" the young man asked with genuine sympathy in his eyes, from which Rosie concluded that he believed her, but she still didn't understand if it was good, but she thanked him for catching her. The young man wanted to ask something, but Rosie did not give him the opportunity. Having picked up the tray, she headed for the exit, saying as she went that she would tell her about the perfume later. And then she ran as fast as she could, feeling her heart pounding wildly. The magic chains couldn't be faulty. There was a high probability that Richard had broken them. If he gets free, she won't live. She needs to tell the butler quickly. In the blink of an eye, the girl ran out of the basement and stopped, catching her breath. And then I saw a tall figure ahead in the corridor. "Butler, there's been trouble." Rosie ran after him. Hearing her scream, the man shuddered and stopped. But he still didn't turn around, so Rosie called him again. "What do you want?" He turned around after a short silence. And the girl became embarrassed when she saw the face of this young man. He was an incredible handsome man, tall with long blonde hair and deep green eyes. "If you have nothing to say, go back to work." The man didn't like that she was silent for a long time and looked at him. Embarrassed, Rosie said it was her turn to look after the monster, and she saw the chains break. The man in front of her asked in surprise if the chains were really damaged, and the girl, with an awkward smile, confirmed that they needed to be checked. Suddenly, the girl was stunned, realizing that she could have made a huge mistake. Soft, light hair reminiscent of gold, beautiful facial features, forest green eyes. She was not herself and therefore was not convinced, similar to the description of another person's appearance. Then Rosie noticed a whip in the young man's hands, and everything fell into place. Could this really be Arjan himself? The man said thoughtfully that this maid seemed useful. Feeling out of place, Rosie nervously replied that she was completely absent-minded and useless, but the man asked what the name of such an unusual girl was. "People around me call me Rosie," she finally answered, realizing that her silence could make things worse. The young man found her way of introducing herself quite unusual, and he promised to remember her name. Watching the retreating figure, Rosie thought with sadness that it was true. It was Arjan. She mentally begged him not to remember her and not to pay any attention to her at all. The next day arrived, very similar to all the previous ones. As Rosie went down to the basement with the tray, she thought about how she needed to stay close to Richard for the rest of the time. Keeping an eye on him will increase her chances of survival. Entering the cell, the girl said that she had brought food, but as soon as she looked at the monster, her eyes widened in surprise. The monster could barely raise his blue eyes to her blood was caked at the edge of his lips, and bruises were visible all over his body. "It's you, Maid," the man said in a weak voice, trying to smile. Looking at his condition, Rosie felt a sharp pang of conscience. "Arjan, it looks like this is his doing." At this time, Richard said that he was a little hurt, and the girl replied that this was so. He asked if she was worried about him, but Rosie knew it wasn't worry, it was guilt. It was because she reported the broken chains, but she couldn't help but report something like that next time, otherwise she would die. Despite this, the feeling of guilt grew stronger, especially when looking at his wounds and tight chains. Realizing that things wouldn't work out this way, the girl just sighed wearily, having made a difficult decision. After asking him to wait a little, the girl put down the bowl and left the cell. Rosie ran down the hallway as fast as she could, thinking she needed to get some ice. And although she ran quickly, suddenly another maid overtook her, also hurrying somewhere. The girl's face was very familiar to Rosie, and at some point she remembered where she had seen her. In the original, her role was to mix some kind of fruit into Richard's food. A fruit called flatlet, which has a stimulating effect. Arousal is appetite or sexual desire. The problem is that it awakens in Richard a desire to kill. Sensing the danger looming over her, Rosie decided that she could not allow this to happen under any circumstances. Richard has a strong thirst for murder. If he loses it, she, a defenseless maid, will be in trouble. He will tear her to shreds. If Rosie stays here, she will either die at the hands of the maddened Richard, or, even if she miraculously survives, the Marquis will finish her off for failing to stop Richard during his rampage. In that case, it was time for her to act, and soon Rosie was opening the kitchen door. "Hello, Mr. Chef. I'll be helping in the kitchen for a while now." The pink-haired girl smiled charmingly. The cook asked where the maid who worked here had gone. Rosie readily told that the girl had bumped into her in the hallway yesterday, fallen, and twisted her ankle. In fact, she pushed her slightly, but she didn't think it would lead to such an injury. The girl continued to tell the puzzled cook that since the kitchen maid had suffered because of her, she offered to work in her place temporarily. Besides, Rosie was already on duty feeding the monster, so everything worked out well. Since she had already arrived, the man pointed to a pile of dishes that she could dry, and the girl began to work, still smiling. Rolling up her sleeves, Rosie thought that everything was going perfectly and according to her plan. Her strategy was to stay in the kitchen and make sure no fruit got into the food. If she simply prevented them from getting into her food, her chances of survival would increase, and if Richard was okay, the Marquise wouldn't pick on her. She felt great. Richard should thank her for saving him. Right up until the moment she saw a mountain of dirty dishes in the sink, she needed to endure a little longer. When she finished with the dishes, fresh, delicious-smelling cookies appeared in front of her. The girl looked at the cookies in front of her in surprise and asked what they were. "If you've already done everything, eat it. I've never seen such a fool before, so this is a special treat. Decide for yourself whether to eat it or not," the cook said haughtily. Rosie thought he was insulting her, but she decided to ignore it and smile, which she did, thanked him, and said she would eat it with pleasure. Having finished her work in the kitchen, the girl took the tray and headed to the basement. It took longer than she thought, but everything is going according to plan. However, there must be demon worshippers in this mansion, and besides preventing Richard's rampage, she has one more thing to do, namely to find the demon worshippers hiding in the mansion. The demon worshippers are a criminal gang that has taken root in the dark corners of the Empire for many years. They committed all sorts of crimes, such as kidnapping people and offering them as living sacrifices to their god. And they especially hated the Chosen Ones because, in their opinion, they were blessed by God, whom they considered their enemy. The innocent Chosen Ones have been persecuted for centuries by demon worshippers. Richard also fell into the trap of the demon worshippers and was captured by the Marquis. Rosie can't help Richard escape, but as long as she's on duty, he shouldn't suffer. That's the only way he'll survive. Having passed the guard at the gate, the girl entered the monster's cell. She stopped when she heard the voice of a young man who was glad that she had come. "You finally arrived, lady. I thought you'd be back soon, but you're late," said Richard. Rosie replied that she had some things to do and put the tray down on the floor. "Please, dinner?" She removed the napkin covering the plate with food. Richard was taken aback when she brought other food instead of the usual rice. But the girl asked if he liked desserts, and it just so happened that she had brought her own dessert with her. She couldn't give him the whole thing, but she would be happy to share half. The man's eyebrows furrowed. Why such a changeable tone? Maybe this maid put something in his food. Or she received some order from Arjan. "Your master would hardly approve of this," he remarked, to which the girl replied that she didn't care. If he ate it, it would disappear, and no one would know. Seeing his thoughtfulness, Rosie added that the ice would melt and the plate could be returned to its place, and no one would guess that the young man was seriously thinking. Finally, the maid suggested that he eat before it got cold, which Richard intended to do. After he ate the first spoonful of hot food, he immediately noticed that the taste was slightly different from usual. "It's true, after all, even familiar food sometimes seems different," the girl said thoughtfully. The way she looked away made the man wonder if she understood or not. Usually they mixed medicine into the food, but today there was none. Richard was tormented by the question of why she was so kind to him. "Lady, you are exceptionally kind today," Richard thanked, returning the empty plate. Rosie replied that she was kind to the sick, and if he ate everything, she would take the dishes. "You say that you are only kind to the sick," the young man chuckled, and the girl shuddered, realizing that she had said something rude. But she immediately turned away, adding that even if a person was not sick, she was always kind. Richard seemed satisfied with her answer and simply agreed that she was a kind lady. But he felt strange when she was around. His mind seemed to clear up. The moment Richard inhales the scent of her body, the instincts of the Chosen One weaken, and at the same time, a desire to keep her close, to possess her completely, boils within him. The young man watched the departing maid with a smile, perhaps. To win her heart, he should remain sick a little longer. Before Rosie left, she remembered that he asked her about perfume, but she didn't wear perfume. As if reading her thoughts, the young man asked again whether she used perfume or not. "I have memory problems. I don't even remember if I ate," the girl answered, and Richard noticed that she was very weak, even fainted. And then he continued, whether she knew it or not, she was giving off a scent, not an artificial scent, but a body scent. He immediately apologized if he had offended anyone, and Rosie directly replied that she felt uncomfortable, and then she suggested that the man hold his breath every time she came. Meanwhile, in one of the servants' rooms, things were not so calm. Not once, but the whole day she didn't add anything. One maid shouted at another. The dark-haired girl replied that another maid was responsible for feeding today, and she was next to the food the whole time. She knew about Rosie. Despite her bright appearance, she was a quiet and calm maid. Could it be because their routes crossed? Having decided that this could happen, the girl ordered the brunette to definitely add more tomorrow, but she hesitated a little, because in fact there were problems with this too. She said that from now on she will always be the first one to come into the kitchen, the girl said, and the blonde did not understand why Rosie needed this. And the brunette explained that, as Rosie said, the chef at work is simply irresistible, and she wants to see him every day. The next morning, Rosie and her friend were going about their usual duties. It's good that the flattery worked. She can calm down for a while. A friend noticed that she was in a good mood and smiling all morning, so she asked what happened. And then she herself decided to share the news that Count Goethas was looking for his missing daughter. Hearing the name, Rosie thought she had heard it somewhere, and she had. In the original, Jurta Goethas is the villain and obsessive protagonist. It was strange that the Count was looking for his sister only after 2 years. But who could figure out these rich people, Emily noted. There is no portrait of the girl, but her distinguishing features include pink hair and eyes. By the way, Rosie, your appearance matches the description, Emily noted. Rosie immediately said that she had been found out. She was the daughter of Duke Goethas, which made her friend just smile. Suddenly, 3 maids blocked the girl's path. They greeted Rosie and Emily a little too nicely, clearly expecting something. Rosie asked them directly why they needed them. They replied that it was nothing special. It was just that Rosie was probably having a hard time feeding the monster. They immediately offered her to replace her in this job. The girl found their words suspicious. They were clearly up to something. Everyone refused to look after the monster and shifted the responsibility onto each other, and then suddenly they want to swap, and even the maids whom she doesn't know. Rose immediately thanked them. She was glad that they took care of her. The 3 maids immediately rejoiced at her answer, assuring her that they would be happy to help her, and then she would help them in return. "But I can handle it myself. You're obviously busier than me," Rosie finished smiling. The girls seemed to panic. They just wanted to help her, but Rosie pointed out that whoever he was, she just delivered the food and left. No big deal. Deciding that the conversation was over, Rosie thanked them again for the offer. The maids were upset, but there was nothing more they could do. As soon as they left, Emily asked what was wrong with them. It was very suspicious. Suddenly, Emily noticed that it was feeding time. She took the bucket from her friend, saying that she would put it away, and hurried her to run to the kitchen faster. Thanks to Emily, Rosie managed to get food for the prisoner in time. But she's worried about those maids. Is there really a backroom player involved here? "I brought food and didn't bring ice today. No big deal," the girl asked as she entered the cell, but as soon as she saw Richard, she froze in surprise. The young man didn't even raise his head to look at her. He looked even worse than yesterday. The previous wounds have become worse, the clothes are torn, and the body is covered with new wounds. Could it really be Arjan again? But it's still too early for that stage. If you look closely, the places where the clothes were torn, as well as the wounds, look strange. They do not appear to have been made by a knife or blunt object. It was as if they had been inflicted with something long, the girl thought, and then it dawned on her. She looked towards the gate, where a young man stood guard, and on the gatekeeper's belt hung a whip with long tassels. Arjan loved beauty as much as he hated it, when even the slightest scratch appeared in his collection. Even when punishing Richard, he did not leave any serious wounds on his body. And Arjan came to Richard only after some time, when a fair amount of love and hate had already accumulated between them. This means there could only be one criminal. But then why did Richard simply allow himself to be beaten? Even though he was in shackles, he was capable of easily dealing with some guard. "Lady, it hurts so much." The girl heard a weak voice as she put the tray down on the floor. She offered to bring him some medicine with lunch, to which the young man reminded her that she herself had said that she was kind to the sick. "Is this really the kindness of a lady?" he asked, looking straight into her eyes. Richard's blue eyes, usually like a calm lake, today seem like a raging storm. If you look into them too long, you can get trapped by the raging waves, unable to get out to the shore and drown in the abyss. While Rosie was pondering the meaning of his words, Richard extended his hand towards her. "You, lady, have a special scent that is unlike anyone else's," he said, gently touching her cheek. When he inhales her scent, his mind clears, and the pain in his whole body goes away, as if it had never been there. He didn't take the magic suppressant, but he doesn't feel any pain at all. It's truly amazing what the reason is. If they had met Richard outside rather than in the dungeon, if he had not been wearing these shackles, Rosie would certainly have been captured, and he would have thoroughly explored every corner his curiosity could reach. Rosie swallowed nervously. He was too close to her. "This is luck. It doesn't hurt. And that's good." She pushed his hand away. But all of this was unimportant now. Rosie didn't know what Richard had in mind, but if he got hurt again, next time he might lose it. She can't just sit and watch him go wild. The next day, Emily called her friend's name with displeasure. She wondered if she really planned to stay there. Rosie sat on the floor outside the cell, passing the monster potatoes which he peeled with her. She reminded her that the head maid had given her permission to work here, but Emily was worried that her friend had been acting strange lately. "Oh, Emily, let's be honest, I've always been weird." Rosie smiled, and Emily had to silently admit it, and also remind her that it was soon dinner for the servants and they had to go. Before leaving, Rosie asked the guard to help her a lot, and at the same time offered to be friends. The gatekeeper wanted to say something, but then a voice was heard from the depths of the cell. "Lady, don't you want to be friends with me? I'm diligently peeling potatoes," Richard asked with a smile that disappeared after the maid's immediate negative answer. Rosie understood that this sly guy thought that she didn't know what was on his mind. He decided to seduce her with his pretty face so that she would help him escape. Maybe someone would get caught, but definitely not her. And since she's here, she needs to keep a close eye on him after such a hint. At least they won't beat him too much. Finally, the girls approached the dining room with a strong feeling of hunger. Emily was so hungry that she was the first to enter the dining room as soon as the girls entered. All conversations suddenly stopped and all eyes were fixed on them. The atmosphere in the dining room was strange, but Rosie couldn't figure out what was causing it. "How come we don't have food?" Emily was indignant. Marie said with a strange smile that they were afraid of the monster's curse that might spread to them, so Rosie should just leave and not bother them. "Why should I leave? I am an employee of this mansion and have the right to dine here," said Rosie. She was not going to starve because of her ridiculous arguments. When the other maids began to whisper that Rosie had fallen in love with the monster and had caught his curse, the girl rudely interrupted them. Marie should remember who let this monster into the mansion, and that her words are an insult to the Marquise. So is she ready to answer for this? Marie was indignant at the nonsense she was talking, and Rosie immediately agreed that it was really stupid to involve the Marquise in her pathetic fabrications. "But let's be clear, with your words you have now insulted all the maids who serve this monster at meals. No one will believe your childish tales, so stop this pathetic spectacle," said Rosie. And then she called Emily, leaving Marie angry in the middle of the dining room. After that incident, Marie began to secretly poison her, once even deliberately spilling juice on her apron, which forced Rosie to change clothes, so she was almost late. Then in the dining room, in the end, an angry Emily almost destroyed the dining room, and Rosie is no longer bullied openly, but all sorts of small dirty tricks have increased. By the way, the attitude towards her and the other maids who hang around Marie has changed dramatically. This means that her duty of feeding is not beneficial to her. Did Marie really persuade the kitchen maid to slip that medicine? The picture is starting to come together. Rosie's shift is over with 4 days left, and she's still got plenty of problems. One of them is this guy who, judging by his appearance, is in pain again. Afterwards, they didn't argue for long about his pain, and the fact that he could cope with it himself, until the young man noticed with offense that she was friendly with the guard, but cold towards him. Rosie thought that the guard was not the one who was going to kill her, so she simply placed the food in front of the prisoner, trying to ignore his words. But this time, as soon as Richard raised the spoon to his mouth, his eyes seemed to glaze over. "As you told the lady, apparently, familiar food really does sometimes taste different," he said in such a cold tone that the girl involuntarily turned around. And then the sound of a falling metal bowl echoed throughout the chamber. The young man bent over as if he was in great pain, and the girl rushed towards him. His body was so hot that Rosie couldn't help but think it was a sign that the food had been spiked with flaret again. She was definitely watching, so when did they manage to do it? But something's wrong here. The flaret fruits don't work immediately after you eat them. The reaction occurs when they accumulate in the body, as far as Rosie knows. While the girl was thinking, changes occurred within the monster, and at some point he suddenly reached out his hands towards her. And then, in the blink of an eye, she found herself lying on the floor of the cell, pinned under a strong male body. He tried to say something, but Rosie only saw his completely crazy eyes. If this continued, Richard would not be able to hold back the impulse and would kill her. His whole body is burning, his blood is boiling, and his heart feels like it is about to burst from pain. Why should he suffer from this torment? He wants to get rid of this feeling. He wants to kill everyone. But if he kills this woman, will the pain go away? If, having enjoyed himself to his heart's content, he kills her cruelly, covers himself with her scent, will it become easier? Suddenly, it seemed as if everything cleared up in Richard's head, and he realized something very important. You can't kill her. She might still be useful to get out of here. With a great effort, Richard stepped back. This servant is still vitally necessary to him. The stunned girl also tried to crawl away from the monster. Tears glistened in her eyes. She really thought that she would die. It was very scary. Just a moment ago, he had been looking at her as if the truth would kill him, but suddenly he seemed to come to his senses. If it weren't for the magic collar, Rosie would no longer be alive. And yet, who added flaret to his food, she carefully made sure that the kitchen maid did not add anything to the food. But one thing is clear, Marie tried. Meanwhile, Marie was in a great mood cleaning the mansion. While wiping the windows, she thought that by this time the poisoned food had already been eaten. There was no need to add poison right in the cook's kitchen. It was dangerous instead. She simply replaced the ingredients and seasonings in this monster's cooking. Marie herself understood that there was no point in being angry with Rosie. But how could she, a simple peasant woman, dare to contradict her? It was simply outrageous. While thinking about how to teach this girl a lesson, she suddenly heard an insinuating whisper behind her. Marie turned around and screamed, but it was Rosie who wanted to consult with her. She heard that Marie gave good advice and thought that she would be able to listen to her problem. "I just want to be friends with you, Marie." Rosie said this sincerely, looking the girl in the eyes. Marie didn't immediately understand what she wanted from her, but when she did, she smiled. Just look at her. An important person, and in the end she came under her wing. There was no need to bother with adding anything. Relaxing, Marie asked Rosie what her problem was, and she told her that she had been having a strange dream lately. In her dream, she eats food and it tastes strange. She went to the kitchen, took a secret look, and there someone was pouring a suspicious potion into her food. And the next day, she continued to add something to the food. The more she talked, the gloomier Marie became. Finally, Rosie very naively asked if she had made an enemy. Marie finally realized what she was doing and roughly poked the girl, the reaction Rosie was just waiting for. "Mary, so it is you after all?" she asked, approaching the maid. Marie no longer tried to deny anything, and only shouted, did she have proof? Did she really think it was normal to talk about what she saw in a dream, how she was pouring poison? Who would believe it? Rosie asked if this meant that she had now confessed to her crime, but she continued to shout that this had not happened, and that Rosie was talking nonsense. "But Marie, why are you so upset about some nonsense, as if you have committed a sin?" Rosie asked thoughtfully. Other maids had already gathered around them, attracted by their screams, but Marie continued to scream that there was nothing behind her, there was no evidence, and Rosie was just accusing people. Realizing she wasn't confessing to anything, Rosie grabbed Marie's hand, and she dragged them through the crowd of maids straight to the butler, who was already waiting for them, which greatly surprised and frightened Marie. "Mary, is it true that you conspired with this kitchen maid to harm the guest?" the butler asked, pointing to the girl sitting next to him on the floor. He demanded instant confession from the maids, while Rosie realized that this man was the butler, but then who was the one she saw earlier? Could it really have been Arjan himself? Yes, he had too handsome a face for a butler. It didn't matter now. First, it was worth solving the problem under their noses. The kitchen maid would no longer be able to deny it, and indeed the girl, in a trembling voice, told them what she had been told to add to the food to make the flavor richer. By the way, Rosie was the first to notice that the kitchen maid was suspicious, and together with Emily, she reported this to the butler. The girl sitting on the floor nervously crumpled her skirt in her hands. Everything was lost if she lied here again. She would not only be kicked out, it would not end there. "It was Madame Marie who ordered it," she cried out, falling down before the butler. Marie knew that her little sister was sick, gave her money, and ordered that poison be added to her food. "What are you saying now, Mr. Butler? This is slander," Marie shouted back. Pointing her finger, she shouted that the kitchen maid was slandering her, but the girl said that she could explain everything. The butler also did not believe why the kitchen maid would deliberately slander Marie. She continued to scream that she didn't know this, but she was innocent. Finally, the butler said that he would report the matter to the marquise, which suited Rosie just fine. It was decided to lock the kitchen maid in prison for now, and Marie was ordered to remain in her room and think about her behavior. For now, this is only a suspicion, but as soon as evidence appears, punishment will follow. Rosie breathed a sigh of relief. Once the problem was solved, it would be good for the next maid who took her place. But as soon as the girls wanted to leave, the butler stopped them and asked a question. "Rosie, would you like to become a personal maid?" It was an offer of promotion, and the girl didn't know how to react to it. At some point, Rosie the maid changed. When she first appeared in the mansion, she was prickly and somehow lifeless, but recently her atmosphere has changed so noticeably that it is impossible not to notice. While Emily was going over this in his head, Rosie apologized for having to refuse the butler's offer. It's not that Emily doesn't like the changes in her friend, but the more she changes, the worse things seem to get. There is such anger in Marie's eyes, as if something bad might happen. Damn it. There was only a little bit left, and this Rosie ruined everything, Marie said emotionally to the guard in the basement that evening. He tried to calm the girl down in case someone heard, and was perplexed as to why she was so angry because Rosie was bothering her. She was sweet after all. The guard's statements angered Marie even more. He wasn't helping her, his beloved, but he was protecting that scoundrel. Was he in his right mind? Trying to calm her down, the young man asked why she had come here, because if they found out that she had left secretly, she wouldn't be able to get away with self-incarceration. Marie replied that she would obtain proof of her innocence. The stupid kitchen maid was in prison, and she was in self-imprisonment in her room, but if the medicine was mixed into the food again, her innocence would be proven. The girl reached out to him and asked pleadingly if he could do this for her, knowing in advance that he would agree. The gatekeeper and the maid were talking in the basement, thinking that no one could see them, but they forgot about one monster who was very interested in watching this scene. The next morning, Rosie brought food down to the basement again, Marie was cleaned up, and the maid's pestering continued. As soon as her shift ends, she will have to either get out of the mansion or decide something. Right at the gates of the cell, a guard and another young man were already waiting for her. She had never seen him before, but he approached her in an overly friendly manner and took the tray from her hands, sympathizing with the fact that she had a lot of problems because of the monster. "The maids have enough work as it is. It's hard for you." The stranger was taking the tray from her hands too actively, but Rosie wouldn't allow it and replied that she was just carrying food. The way he so calmly invades another person's personal space suggests he's a typical hero lover or just a clingy pervert. In any case, Rosie tried to keep her distance from him, looking at the stranger with suspicion. At the same time, she found herself very close with her back to the guard, who literally froze in place. While Rosie was arguing with the persistent stranger, the guard quietly poured some powder into the food. Meanwhile, Rosie insistently said that she needed to take the food to whoever was inside and pointed her head at the camera. "To the one inside. Why do you call this monster that? Maybe the rumors about the curse are true, Rosie," the stranger said mockingly. The girl could barely contain herself, feeling rage rising inside her, but if she said anything, she would definitely get into trouble, so she tried to calm down. "Then what should I call him?" she asked calmly. The stranger replied that he was a monster, but the girl noted that she always called both animals and people by their names, if they had names, but now she didn't know his name, so she called him the one inside. Wasn't that right? Her words sounded like an accusation, and the young man became embarrassed, causing the girl to notice with an innocent smile that he was speaking as if she had done something wrong, and that this was a little unpleasant. Deciding she had enough time for this pervert, she turned and headed straight for the cell. They were already waiting for her there, and in a very unexpected form. "Lady, do you think I'm a good person?" Richard asked, looking at her strangely. Rosie blushed. It turned out he heard everything. But did she really speak so loudly? After all, that guy was the one swearing, and now she feels awkward. She feels as if she was caught gossiping. "From a biological point of view, you are a human," the girl muttered, trying not to look at him. Richard smiled dazzlingly and confirmed that this was indeed the case. Meanwhile, the girl transferred the food from the bowl to a plate and served it to her young charge. Richard, looking into her eyes, sincerely thanked the lady. However, the plate suddenly fell to the floor while being passed from hand to hand. Rosie tried to catch it, but nothing happened, and all the food ended up on the floor of the cell. The girl began to apologize. It was the first time in her life that she had made such a mistake, or perhaps she was too busy looking at Richard and didn't notice. "Lady, you're disappointing me." The young man's voice brought her out of her reverie. He was still looking at her, but with such an expression on his face that the girl was taken aback. When the meaning of his words reached her, she became indignant, and, was this really a mockery on his part, he decided to throw away his feigned politeness and was now simply mocking her. After apologizing again but now angry, she promised to bring the food again. However, Richard suddenly said that she was not so perceptive, which made Rosie again think that he was picking on her because of the dropped plate. And she was also annoyed by the fact that he was constantly smirking. She didn't understand what was funny about it. The young man said that he did not like to see a lady in trouble, and then he asked her when she came in if she noticed anything strange. When Rosie said that there really was some strange guy, Richard said that it was just the thing to attract attention. Meanwhile, Marie was still sitting in her room, showing impatience. She took a risk by secretly bringing in the fruits, and that idiot couldn't do anything. Then another maid burst into the room with urgent news that the monster had lost consciousness. And although the news wasn't exactly good, Marie was genuinely happy about it. Soon, all the maids in the mansion were discussing the fact that the monster had lost consciousness and were gossiping that poison had been added to the food. But it was not Marie who was accused. She had been locked in her room all this time, so who was the real culprit? "Explain to me how this happened, Rosie," they asked the girl sitting on their knees. Marie watched this scene with delight, secretly rejoicing that this girl had finally shown off enough. She literally celebrated her victory, seeing how the one for whom she was accused was humiliated. Rosie's expression was one of submission, and at one point she gave Marie a rather frightening look. And soon it dawned on Marie that she looked nothing like the accused, and this frightened her. Rosie laughed, which was completely out of place in the situation. Having finished Richard's story, Rosie began to think about what she should do with this matter. After Richard mentioned getting attention and she asked him to talk about it, the young man responded by asking her to do something before him. Rosie promised to do anything except help him escape, and that was enough for him. However, Rosie didn't expect that he would ask to spend time not only with the guard, but also with him. This was a very strange condition. Rosie wondered what Richard was thinking. Did he really take her spying on the gatekeeper for a desire to flirt with him? "That man was needed to distract you," Richard said. And he explained that it was all done in order to add poison to his food. "Last night a maid named Marie came. It seems she wants to stir things up and take revenge on the maid, and apparently she and the gatekeeper are quite close. The gatekeeper brought someone who could distract her attention. There was a feeling that the man was interested in her." Rosie's insides exploded. What a creature. She's clinging to life with all her might, and they're just hanging the death flag on her. No mercy. She can't just sit back and let this happen. "Okay, I understand. Then I'll have to pay them back in full, and at the same time I'll avenge you," Rosie answered Richard. When the young man asked what it meant to take revenge on him, the girl explained that last time he was hit with the gatekeeper's whip. Richard was deeply touched, but explained that he had deliberately allowed himself to be hit so that she could not take revenge. After all, she had said that one should be kind to patients, so he had decided to deliberately become a patient by allowing himself to be hit. Richard was clearly crazy, but thanks to him, this matter would be easier to pull off. The plan that Marie came up with, Rosie will return it to her in the same form. And now Rosie was sitting on the floor in front of the butler, who was rightly pointing out that Marie, who had previously been accused of being a criminal, had been locked in her room all this time. So why had this happened again? Now the accusations were directed at Rosie, and everyone waited for her response. She is the criminal. She is definitely in cahoots with the kitchen maid. It was Rosie who definitely set everything up to frame Marie. The other maids joined in. All the servants around began to exchange Rosie, and only Emily was on her friend's side. The butler said that silence would not solve anything, and asked the gatekeeper to tell him what had happened that morning. Emily listened with bated breath as her friend was accused of something she was sure she had not done. The guard said that the lady servant brought food as usual. She kept the food with her all the time, so that no one could touch it, and there was nothing unusual. At some point, Emily couldn't take it anymore and rushed to hug Rosie, asking her to say at least something in her defense. The girl replied that she knew nothing about it, which made the butler just sigh wearily. If not you, then who? The kitchen, by order of the Marquis, was closed to outsiders, the man said. And Marie spent the whole day locked up, which means Rosie is the most likely suspect in the poisoning. Just in case, the butler questioned the cook, and other servants confirmed that it was not him. Rosie said that she did not suspect the gentleman of being a cook. He was not that kind of person, which is why the aforementioned cook was sincerely touched by such words. "But, Mr. Butler, do you really consider me a criminal?" the girl asked directly. The butler replied that he was not here for verbal games. She should tell the truth and be done with it. Deciding it was time to end this performance, Rosie rose to her feet and announced that she needed to clarify something. "Mary, why did you do this?" she suddenly asked the maid. Does she really think that if Richard had died from this poison, they would have remained safe and sound? "Mary, are you scared now?" Rosie asked, approaching the girl. She calmly and even with a smile asked again why she had added poison. Marie was really scared. Why was that bitch Rosie so calm? Something was wrong here. The fruits used were clearly not supposed to be life-threatening. Why then did that monster faint? Did Rosie really switch them with poison? Marie decided that the stupid girl had finally fallen into a trap, so she confidently turned to the butler. Doesn't it seem strange to him that just yesterday, as soon as she was declared a criminal, this fruit turned into poison? "Rosie set it all up to kill the monster and frame me," Maria said confidently. But as soon as she said it, she immediately realized the magnitude of the mistake she had made. Even the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Whispers began again among the servants. Everyone was perplexed as to how she knew that it was the fruit that had been slipped in yesterday. Marie tried to justify her words somehow, saying that she herself had shown the butler yesterday that there was only one fruit in that book. But the man said that everyone only knows that the monster collapsed after eating poison, but no one knows that the poison came from the fruit. It was all over for Marie. She couldn't get out of it anymore. Everything was clear anyway, so the butler ordered the guards to take the maid away. He also ordered the gatekeeper to be taken away, since he had acted as Marie's witness and he would also have to give testimony. Rosie and Emily simply watched as the criminals were led away. Frankly, Rosie was a little hesitant about blowing it out of proportion, but if she just told the butler, there would be no physical evidence, and if Marie denied it, she would be hard to catch. In this case, the surest way to achieve recognition of the defect is to do so. It's good that Marie took the bait so eagerly, the girl thought. Thus, the incident was resolved, and Marie was thrown out of the Marquise's house. The one who offended Richard has also been eliminated, which means Rosie will be able to live the rest of her time in peace. And that would have been the case if at some point Richard had not asked if he could take off the maid's clothes. And even though Rosie herself agreed to this, what kind of situation is this? The girl wondered if she had heard correctly. "I asked if I could undress you," the young man repeated with a smile, and Rosie realized that she had heard correctly. She asked sarcastically if this was his hobby, since he had deliberately allowed the guard to beat him, but the young man replied with a smile that he didn't have such a hobby, but if the lady was pleased, he would allow himself to be beaten. The girl insisted that she did not feel any joy from the beating when Richard grabbed her by the shoulder. "Just a shoulder, just a little glimpse," the young man repeated embarrassedly. Rosie wondered why he needed it, but he assured her that if she showed him, he would explain everything. Not understanding what was going on, the girl nevertheless began to undress since he was asking her to. She could show just a little, because there was nothing wrong with that. The young man immediately added that if she didn't want to, she could refuse, he would never force her. But Rosie had already agreed, so she pulled down her dress, exposing her shoulder, allowing him to look. Although the young man insisted on this, he was quite surprised that she nevertheless agreed to his conditions. Rosie felt awkward, and when he asked why she didn't refuse, she replied that in any case, if he did anything wrong, she would kill him on the spot. Besides, in her world, showing one's shoulder was a normal thing to do, but she wouldn't tell him that. After all, a shoulder is just a shoulder. Richard carefully brushed her hair back from her shoulder, exposing her back. "Well, is that enough?" the girl asked, while he continued to look at her bare shoulder. Turning around, she asked what was wrong with him, why he was silent. Richard, pulling her dress back on, in turn asked if she knew about demon worshippers and that they had a brand. As a sign of their readiness to become the demon's wing, worshippers burn a brand near their shoulder blades with a hot iron. The girl listened and wondered why he suddenly started talking about demon worshippers. "I think the lady is a demon worshipper," the young man said. Rosie couldn't believe he thought that about such a good-natured person like her, but Richard questioned her good-naturedness. She didn't have a brand, which surprised him, to which the girl reasonably noted that if she had, she wouldn't have shown it to him. It suddenly dawned on Rosie that he had suspected her because of the very smell that emanated from her, and Richard confirmed her guess. He thought that they had changed tactics this time. It angered her that he suspected her, but it didn't matter anymore, because their relationship was ending today. Today is her last day of feeding duty, and if she doesn't have to see him every day, she won't have to fear for her life. Eventually, they returned to their now familiar task of peeling potatoes, and although Richard was slightly indignant that she was using him, he still got to work. While the young people were chatting about potatoes, approaching footsteps were heard outside the cell. Rosie, Trouble Emily's friend, has appeared in the basement. The young men were surprised by the emotionality of the girl who appeared. Richard said with a smile that the lady had to go, but Rosie was getting ready to leave anyway, promising to come back a little later with dinner, so he should peel all the potatoes. Emily watched in amazement as they negotiated, even as the monster asked if there would be a reward if he peeled all the potatoes. There were many different rumors about the monster, but now this man was just calmly peeling potatoes. "Rosie, what's your relationship with the monster?" Emily asked her friend. But when her friend replied that she was just his breadwinner, Emily was indignant that she was not talking about that she was interested in why they were so close. Rosie didn't understand what Emily was talking about and reminded her that she had called for some reason. Emily remembered that she had almost forgotten to tell her about the trouble. "The Marquis ordered you to serve him in the bedroom," her friend said emotionally, and it took Rosie a moment to understand her words. Serving in the bedroom means what she thinks about. In complete horror, Rosie asked where the butler was, and she and Emily ran up to the second floor. The innocent potato in the young man's hands made a faint sound as it was squeezed. Richard also heard that the Marquis ordered Rosie to serve him in the bedroom. Standing in front of the Marquise's bedroom door, the girl could not believe that this was actually happening. No matter how hard she tried to object, in the end she was simply pushed right up to the door of the Marquise's bedroom. Lamenting that nothing was going as she wanted, the girl knocked. A voice from the room allowed her to enter. The Marquis was already waiting for her. In the bedroom, Rosie was met by a tall, handsome young man with long blonde hair and deep green eyes. "So this is what he is like, Marquis Arjan. He definitely doesn't look like a butler." She tried so hard to avoid death at the hands of the monster that she involuntarily came into the sight of the Marquis, who could also make her life difficult. The man asked if she had refused his proposal because of the rumors about the monster, but the girl answered no. Rosie realized that this was the reason he had called her. Trying to remain calm, the girl replied that she would soon leave this place. Arjan had previously needed a personal maid for Richard, and since she knew about Richard's attempts to escape and even revealed Marie's guilt, in his eyes she might have seemed like a suitable candidate. She wanted to avoid death, but instead she caught the eye of Arjan himself. Well, bad luck. She said that she was lucky enough to work in the Marquise's house, but now circumstances have changed, and she wants to fulfill the dream she has cherished since childhood. Arjan took a few steps towards the girl, so that he was in close proximity. When the Marquis asked what this dream was, Rosie sheepishly replied that it was marriage. The young man suggested that if she wanted to, she would only need to choose someone from the mansion, and he would introduce him to her. His proposal outraged the girl, but she maintained an outward calm. And looking very confidently at the Marquis, she answered that she wanted to marry the man she loved. The man replied that she was desiring something useless, since love was so short-lived. Over time, love will fade and bring misfortune. He stated this too seriously. Rosie expected the Marquis to react this way. As a child, he did not receive parental love. It is natural for parents to take care of a child, but for Arjan's parents, such a normal thing was not obvious. Young Arjan did not know that it was not his fault, and he began to hate not his parents but himself, and he believed that he was not handsome, although obviously and objectively he was very handsome. But if you yourself don't think so, then beauty is of little use. Since then, Arjan has been fixated on beauty, and without receiving parental care, he decided that there is no point in love. Rosie replied that she understood that love could be short-lived, but man is irrational, so now she wants to make such an immature choice. The Marquis realized that it was useless to try to convince her. The girl confirmed that she would have to leave within 2 weeks. It seemed that their conversation ended there, and the Marquis took a few steps away from her, but then stopped. Sitting down on the bed, he reported that she was the first of the maids to notice that the chain was faulty, and he honestly admitted that it was he who did it. This came as a surprise to Rosie, but she was still interested in why Richard had a sprained ankle then. Arjan continued to say that it didn't mean that broken chains would ensure an escape from the mansion, and besides, he wasn't in the best shape. The young man also remembered that the monster had not asked for medicine recently, and asked the girl why, which made her shudder. "Sorry, I gave him medicine," Rosie immediately confessed. The man replied that these were trifles, and that such a small amount could not cure anyone, but he was still interested in the reason for Richard's improvement. Rosie herself didn't know this, but she assumed that it might be the scent that Richard mentioned. But nothing was clear yet. It was necessary to keep this a secret from Arjan, so she replied that she didn't know anything. "What could some maid know that's true?" the Marquis answered, as if to himself. Having decided that their conversation was over, the girl asked permission to go. "Where are you going?" "You didn't know that you had to serve me in the bedroom today?" Arjan suddenly asked. Rosie was shocked by his words, but quickly pulled herself together and apologized, saying that she didn't usually do this job and therefore didn't know anything. "So, it's enough to change the bed?" the girl asked naively. Her naivety was so sincere that the Marquis was taken aback, not knowing what to say. When the shock of her words had passed, he asked if she didn't understand what it meant to serve in the bedroom. "I'm so immature, I don't understand anything," Rosie said to herself, smiling sweetly at the gentleman. And when the girl asked if her duties didn't include cleaning and caring for the Marquis, the young man only sighed quietly, saying that she was free to go. It was getting on towards evening, and the Arjan mansion was gradually sinking into darkness. That same gatekeeper from the basement ran as fast as he could through the forest, happy that he had survived. If it weren't for the man the master had sent, he would have rotted in the cell, and now the gatekeeper regretted having helped Marie. And yet, before getting into the cell, he managed to hide the information he received. Now he will get the money, and he can get out of here. After some time, he was already standing at the door of an inconspicuous house. As soon as he knocked on the door, it opened and he was allowed inside. A man in a hood hiding his face opened the door for him, and there was another man sitting at the table in the house. "You're that gatekeeper. It's good that you managed to get out," he asked, looking at the one who entered. The gatekeeper immediately fell to his knees, thanking his savior. Only with his help was he able to escape. The mysterious figure did not need gratitude, but he was interested in the interesting information in the gatekeeper's report. "The woman who reported the incident is named Rosie. What does she look like?" he asked. The gatekeeper was taken aback by this question. He didn't understand what the maid had to do with it. The other person who opened the door for him immediately stepped forward, declaring to the gentleman that she was only her namesake, for which he immediately received a reprimand from his master for daring to interfere and comment on his questions, and immediately apologized, saying that he had expressed his opinion. "I don't care about your opinion, get out," the gentleman replied. And then he turned to the gatekeeper, demanding that he answer his question. The gatekeeper replied that Rosie had pink hair and eyes, a proud posture, and resembled a cat, and that she had a mysterious aura about her. "Well, my runaway sister is behaving quite interestingly," the young man remarked mysteriously. While all this was happening in an inconspicuous hut in the forest, Rosie slept peacefully in her bed. It was the middle of the night and there was a ringing silence all around. A certain gentleman was waiting for his servant to return from the street and asked if he had finished cleaning. He replied that everything was done and he returned. There was freshly dug earth right next to the house, and the servant asked the master what he was going to do next. "I heard that there will soon be a banquet at the Marquis of Avantes' mansion," remarked the young man with red eyes, and he mysteriously asked his assistant whether he should be there, which the assistant was not happy about. Slave or anyone else, it's okay. He hopes to meet his older sister this time, because in reality, his patience with his sister is running out. It all started many years ago in the huge Goethe's mansion. The pink-haired woman brought a girl with hair like hers to their house. The little girl introduced herself as Rosie and said she was 13 years old, to which the owner of the house responded that this was tasteless. It would be nice to change the name to something suitable for this family. From that day on, her name is Rose Goethes. One day, when Rose was admiring the rose bushes in the garden, a stone hit her on the head. Some kind of worm crawled into the house. The boy hissed angrily, holding a bloody stone in his hands. But even despite her situation, the girl did not lower her gaze, continuing, as before, to look directly at the son of the owner of the estate. "What are you looking at? Close your eyes," the boy said angrily. The girl had no intention of giving in to him, so in a casual tone, she ordered him to get lost. He became even more angry and swung to hit her a second time. But he was stopped by the voice of his younger brother, a boy with the same hair and eyes as him, who demanded that it stop. The younger brother's name was Yurta, and the older one couldn't do what he wanted. So he simply turned around and walked away, leaving the two of them in the garden. Rose looked at the unexpected savior as indifferently as she had at his brother. "Lady, I just saved you, but you won't tell me anything," the boy asked. The girl was silent, and then told him the same thing she told his brother, to get lost. She doesn't want to see either of them, so he should get lost too. As soon as Rose finished speaking, hands reached out to her. "No, you can't behave like that, sister." Yurta's hands closed around her neck. Rosie woke up from a nightmare, still feeling the strangling hands on her neck. Trying to calm her pounding heart, the girl had a hard time realizing that it was a dream. Because of the nightmare, she didn't get enough sleep, which was clearly reflected on her face. Emily also noticed that she had not slept well, and Rosie confirmed that she had had a nightmare. The girl had never dreamed of such a thing. If she thinks correctly, then these are the memories of Rosie's body. The face she saw was a little familiar to her. So it turns out that Rosie was the older sister of the Madman in this novel. They say words become seeds. She never thought that what she said to Emily as a joke would turn out to be true. First, she should start remembering everything in order. Rosie and that crazy guy are brother and sister, not related by blood at all. Rosie seemed like an unwelcome guest in the Gertis mansion, which is why she ran away. She took a job with the Marquise of Avantes to earn a living. It would not be easy for a famous lady leading a comfortable life to survive working as a maid. This seems to mean that she was not very keen on coming back. It is unknown what kind of life Rosie has lived so far, but it is quite obvious that if she is caught, it will be dangerous. Now that it had come to this, she needed to run as fast as possible. Rosie froze in thought, wondering if she should dye her hair to hide her appearance. Rosie asked Emily about the missing daughter of the Earl, specifically, whether there was by any chance a portrait of her. Emily replied that she wasn't sure about that, but she had heard rumors that they were going to hang the portrait, but the second gentleman made a fuss, saying that he couldn't just show his older sister's face. Hearing this, Rose wondered whether all this was fortunate or unfortunate. Emily asked Rosie why she was asking this, and she said she was just asking, but her friend assumed she wanted a reward. Meanwhile, Richard was also lost in thought in his cell. Although it is insignificant, the magical power has decreased. As expected, the smell coming from the maid softens the pain. At first, he suspected she was a Satanist, but she didn't have a tattoo of wings on her back and she acted casual. The memory of this cheeky girl warmed his soul. This maid is probably the only one who uses it only for peeling potatoes. There was a time when this made Richard laugh genuinely, although he only knows how to laugh artificially. What if he had pretended then that he couldn't overcome his impulse and left his mark on her? The young man was becoming more and more convinced that he had gone crazy, but he needed that maid. He had to take her if he could escape from here. Light female footsteps were heard in the basement. Someone was coming down. Richard decided that for now he should gradually reduce the distance between them and try to maintain good relations. He looked up at the girl who had approached and immediately froze in surprise. "Hello, my name is Ella and I am responsible for you," the girl said. Richard froze, wondering if they had changed his maid again. But where is his pink-haired maid then? Rosie, meanwhile, was working upstairs like many other maids. The butler approached her and said that he had heard that she was quitting. Realizing what Arjan had already told him, the girl confirmed his words. The man believed that such a good place of work was rare, and if she left without a letter of recommendation, it would be difficult for her to find work again. He also asked why she was quitting, to which the girl replied that it was time for her to get married and start a family. The butler could not say anything against such arguments, since she had indeed reached the age for marriage. But he was sorry to part with her. She would have become a good personal servant. But he still thanked her for her responsible work until now. Suddenly, the maid Ella burst into the room with a wild scream, frightening everyone around. She immediately rushed to Rosie, asking her to switch food-serving duties with her, and in turn, she promised to work all her shifts for her. The butler objected that it was Ella's turn to be on duty, but the girl was almost crying, saying that she was very scared and she simply couldn't take it anymore. "I beg you, Rosie, switch with me. You've been doing so well all this time. The butler himself offered you the chance to become his personal servant." The girl fell to her knees in front of the stunned Rosie. But she had no intention of becoming the monster's servant again. As Ella knew, duty could not be changed twice. Ella rose from her knees and quietly asked if Rosie was embarrassed in front of her. "It's because you refuse to be your personal servant that I have to do it in your place. Aren't you ashamed in front of me?" The girl screamed, attacking Rosie, so much so that the butler had to push her away. The butler scolded the girl that until now everyone had steadfastly carried out their work, and if they made an exception just for her, then what would the others say? Ella insisted that she was so scared that she couldn't know if this monster would go crazy and start acting up, but the butler was adamant, and the girl could only cry bitterly. Rosie asked her to wait a little while. She brought something that would help her. Soon the girl returned with a tray full of unpeeled potatoes. She began to insist that the monster liked peeling potatoes. If Ella gives him such a task, he will definitely like it. That same evening, someone called out to Rosie again. "Thank you, Rosie. He really does seem to like potatoes, just like you said," Ella said. Rosie was very surprised by this, but she was even more surprised when she saw the condition of the peeled potatoes. Meanwhile, Yurta Gertas was heading to the mansion while his assistant tried to stop him. Yurta, who had a strong obsession with Rosie, began searching for her 2 years ago when she suddenly disappeared, but found no clues. Unable to find her on his own, he even took a risk and offered a reward, but in return he received only false information. And then suddenly he finds her. Information about the pink-haired woman working in the Marquise's house. Usually, given his strong obsession with his older sister, one would expect that he would want to immediately check everything. But the gentleman needs to make a good impression on Arjan, the financial manager. If he, who has the right to use state lands, gets permission to develop the mines, then the House of Gertas will be able to get the mines that they never had. Now that he had been disqualified from the succession by incurring the wrath of the head of the house, permission for the mines was absolutely essential for him to regain his position. So now we need to make a good impression on the house of the Marquis of Vivantes. In case the negotiations failed, he planted a spy, but the only thing he learned was the story of that very woman named Rosie. The gentleman, when it comes to his older sister, always behaves like a thug, which causes a lot of trouble. "And if that maid turns out not to be your sister, what should we do?" Then the assistant did not give up hope of bringing the master to his senses, but he replied that then, of course, he would kill her. Killing a servant from another house was not a good idea, as Marquis Vivantes might think that their house did not respect him, but Yurta insisted that she had deceived him. It was completely impossible to talk to him. Rosie herself, hiding behind a column, overheard this entire conversation. She was horrified. Had she heard correctly? Yurta Gertas, a minor villain. And she herself, most likely, is not his real older sister. But did he really come here to catch his sister? It can't be. She hasn't had any reason until now. In any case, if she gets caught, it's the end for her. Emily noticed that her friend was acting strangely and asked what was wrong, to which Rosie replied that she had a fear of crowds and it made her sick. Deciding to take advantage of the moment, she asked Emily to leave early today, promising to work properly tomorrow, and her friend let her go. Rosie tried to speak quietly, not attracting anyone's attention. At one point, it seemed that the Marquise's guest noticed her, but the young man then turned away. Rosie needed to run, taking advantage of the opportunity while Yurta was talking to someone. She ran, but awkwardly bumped into another guest with a glass in his hand. "You worthless piece of shit, how dare you bump into just anyone?" The irritated voice of some man echoed throughout the hall, which immediately attracted everyone's attention. The collision caused Rosie to fall, and she sat on the floor, listening to the aristocrat's screams, and realizing in horror that she was in full view of everyone. Emily rushed to her friend and loudly asked if Rosie was okay. At this name, Yurta instantly turned towards the girls, hearing her name. Meanwhile, the man the girl had bumped into continued to shout that they were being impudent and not even apologizing. Emily apologized for her friend, saying that she was very sick today, but this did not calm the man down. Suddenly, a tall young man appeared in front of him, shielding the girls. "Viscount, is it really worth raising your voice on such a beautiful day?" said the Marquis of Vivantes with a smile. He leaned over to the noisy guest and said that they had tried to create a pleasant atmosphere, but it would be a shame if it were spoiled by his bad mood, which caused the Viscount to stammer a frightened apology. Emily, meanwhile, was asking if Rosie was okay, seeing that her friend's face was literally gone. "What are you standing there for?" "Take her to her room quickly," the Marquis told her, and Emily thanked him and began to leave. Rosie was indescribably horrified by what had just happened. A moment ago, Yurta met her gaze. Heading to the servants' wing, Emily sighed at the fact that the Marquis had helped them. And she asked Rosie if she was very scared, to which the girl replied that everything was fine. Because of the commotion, Yurta was approaching them, and they definitely made eye contact. Thanks to Arjan, she managed to hide from his gaze a little, but it seemed that things were bad. After telling Emily that she would get to the room on her own, the girl told her friend to go, promising that everything would be fine. They said goodbye, and Rosie headed to her room with a clear plan of action. A familiar voice stopped her, and the girl shuddered in fear. "Maid, or should I call you Lady Gertus?" the man said, and Rosie had to turn around. Right in front of her stood none other than Yurta Gertus's assistant. Trying to save face, she said that he was mistaken. The man added with a sigh that his master thought differently, and his master ordered the following message to be conveyed to the girl. To keep her awake tonight and waiting for him, he said he would come see her before the end of the night. At this point, the assistant announced that he had delivered the message and hastened to take his leave. Rosie remained standing, realizing the meaning of the words spoken. He said that he would come to her soon. Her body was shaking like crazy. Rosie's body was probably instinctively rejecting it. She needs to run right now without wasting a minute. But where can she go? She has nowhere to go. If she goes out without a plan, she will quickly be caught. Instinctively, she decided to run anywhere, to a place where Yurta had never set foot, to a place where she could be reliably protected. The only such place that seemed possible was the cell in the basement, and standing in front of the bars, Rosie wondered if she was doing the right thing. No matter how urgent it is, it's like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. Luckily, the new gatekeeper was fast asleep, so Rosie could enter the cell without any problems. The mad wolf and the tiger, not yet showing aggression, the girl was between the two predators. But what choice would be correct in her situation? She unlocked the door and walked in. Richard stood in the middle of the cell and seemed to be waiting for her. Rosie was still not sure she had made the right choice, so she froze in place. "Maid, why are you so late?" the young man asked with a smile, adding that he had been waiting for her. The girl stood hesitantly at the very entrance to the cell, not knowing what to do next. Richard called her to come closer, but she replied that she didn't want to. "You came to see me. You are not my personal maid now," the man noted, extending his hand to her. Instinctively, Rosie extended her hand in response, realizing that his words perfectly reflected the essence of her action. With one sharp movement, he grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him. In the blink of an eye, Rosie found herself in the arms of the monster, who held her tightly to him. To somehow smooth over the awkward feeling, Rosie asked what he did to Ella that morning. "I don't even know who Ella is," Richard asked, and when the girl explained that she was his maid who brought food today, he thoughtfully replied that he hadn't done anything special. He just glared at her when she scolded Rosie in front of him. While understanding Ella's feelings perfectly, Rosie nevertheless could not scold Richard, even though she considered him shameless. "I don't do this to others, only to you, Madam Maid. Do I behave this way?" The young man continued to hug her. It hurt him that the girl was making such a displeased face, but Rosie literally had it written on her forehead that she didn't like it, and it would be better if he was hurt, and he left her alone. "Maid, we need to get closer because I think I'll be seeing you for a long time," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. The girl was taken aback by his words, not understanding what he was talking about, and she shuddered nervously when he directly asked her to help him get out of here. He asked what she wanted, anything she liked. If she helped him escape, then he would fulfill everything he wished. Richard promised her this and extended his hand to her, but the girl hesitated. Richard, who had been balancing on the edge of what was permitted until now, is now trying to stick the death flag directly into her, but something is bothering her. In the original, Richard didn't tell anyone about the escape and ran away on his own, so why does he, with such power, ask her for help? Perhaps some aspects of the original that were unknown to her have changed. "I didn't hear anything." The girl turned around abruptly, promising that she wouldn't tell the Marquise, but that he shouldn't raise such topics in the future. As she walked towards the exit of the cell, she added that she did not want to die because of stupid things. Richard's mood changed in an instant, but he didn't detain Rosie. The girl ran to her room as fast as she could. She was convinced that she needed to leave this place immediately. It can no longer be guaranteed that the Marquis's house is safe for her. First, she will go out into the city, stay at a hotel, and at dawn she will board a ship and leave the capital. She will decide what to do next on the spot. Fortunately, everyone was busy preparing for the reception, and therefore the security was relaxed. And although it would be difficult for her to hire a carriage, she had to escape from this house. "Where are you going?" A terribly familiar voice stopped her. A second later, the girl found herself captured by tenacious male hands. "Gotcha," Yurta whispered in her ear. The man hugged her tightly from behind, and with relief evident in his voice, he said that he had found his little sister. Rosie had not yet seen his face, but with horror she recognized that voice, Yurta Gertas, the minor villain of this novel. The girl caught her breath. Even his simple touch caused a strong feeling of disgust. "Little sister, why did you run away?" "Because I went to the academy alone. I told you to come with me." The man pressed his face against her neck in a completely unbrotherly manner. He did not let her go and continued to say that she had abandoned him and left. She was the first one who had brought his patience to such a limit. Turning the girl's face towards you, he stated categorically that the game of Maid was now over and it was time for her to return. "Who are you?" the girl asked, stunning Yurta with her question. And the very next moment she broke free from his embrace. With an offended look, the girl asked who he was to take her away. Did he still not understand why she left that house? After all, if he was abandoned, then he had to tactfully disappear. She would definitely not return home. "Little sister, you better not make me angry." Yurta Gertas's red eyes flashed dangerously. Rosie felt uncomfortable, but strangely calmed down in the dream. The previous Rosie had also always been resilient in the face of humiliation. She didn't know the details of their relationship, but the main thing now was to get out of this situation, so the girl assured him that she was fine here and she would never return home. The young man replied that his little sister, as always, only gave the worst answers. "Our cruel little sister, you abandoned me, but I'm not going to let you go." He took another step towards her and grabbed her hand. Rose tried to break free, but he asked if she knew how much pain it had been for him these 2 years without her. In response, the girl asked if he knew how easy it was for her without him. The man continued to say that after she disappeared, he started taking the magic suppressant again, but even that was worse than it could have been, and his words made the girl think. True, Yurta was also one of those special ones. He was one of the few who could fight on equal terms with Richard. Even taking the suppressant, "Being separated from you, sister, my body felt like it was on fire." The man continued to speak, and Rosie realized that Richard had said something similar, that the scent emanating from her was drowning out his pain, and she had thought it was just a ploy to draw her into escaping. It got to the point where it's surprising that Rosie was barely mentioned in the original. Meanwhile, Yurta said that when they returned home, they would need to buy shackles so that she could no longer escape, and these words suddenly sobered the girl. Damn, the ending is worse than the death flag. A psycho has appeared who is worse than Arjan, who imprisoned Richard. If they drag her away like that, she will spend her whole life in chains next to Yurta, perhaps as an instrument to dull his pain. While the girl was feverishly trying to figure out how to escape, a man's voice was heard asking what the Count was doing with his maid. "If you want to satisfy your lust, crawl to the red light district, young master. Don't dare do dirty deeds in my Avantes," the Marquis said with contempt. Yurta tried to explain that this girl was not who she claimed to be, but Rosie was the first to rush to the Marquis, shouting that it seemed that the young gentleman Count was very drunk. Without giving Yurta a chance to say a word, she quickly rattled off that the young gentleman was so drunk that he kept calling her little sister. The Marquis chuckled. He had heard about the young master's misfortune. They say that his only sister had disappeared. But confusing his maid with his sister is no good. The words that it was his maid offended Yurta. While the Marquis condescendingly said that he would turn a blind eye to the Count's drunken antics and demanded that his maid be released, the girl thought with pleasure that the best defense was an attack. However, then their conversation went somewhere wrong, and Gertas asked again what his maid meant. The Marquis replied that this girl was a little special to him. She served him in the bedroom. Rosie was so shocked by what she heard that she couldn't even say a word as Marquis Cervantes looked at them calmly. Could it really be that the failed change of sheets in the bedroom allowed the Marquis to say such a thing? Yurta would certainly misunderstand. And indeed, Count Gertas, with a completely crazy look, asked Rosie what this meant. The girl suddenly felt extremely tired of the whole situation, and the Marquis answered for her that she was not his sister, but his maid, and the Count was still not sober. Why did there hang a ringing silence for a while, and all this time Rosie thought only about how she wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Finally, under the influence of the situation, Count Gertas let go of the girl's hand. And then he leaned towards the girl and said that if this was her will, then he would back down. Rosie clearly understood that nothing was over yet when he added that she could look forward to their next meeting. Passing by the Marquis of Antes, Yurta said to him until the next meeting. Rosie and the gentleman remained to watch the young Count leave. Why did the girl sincerely thank the Marquis for his help? To which he replied that he simply didn't like it when people touched his things, and even though they literally called her a thing, she was grateful. "What is this dirt?" asked the young man, pointing to the suitcase in the girl's hands. The girl was frantically trying to come up with an excuse, because if Arjan found out that she was trying to escape, there would be problems, when the man suddenly turned around and, pointing his head to the side, said that the garbage collection point was there, and if she continued to keep the garbage, it would be ugly. Realizing that her suitcase was literally called trash, the girl nevertheless tried to keep a smile on her face. In the end, she never slept that night. A lot happened yesterday, and in the end she couldn't escape. And besides, she still doesn't understand what the words that Yurta whispered to her yesterday mean, but to be honest, she doesn't want to understand them, feeling that she shouldn't know this. One thing is clear, it will be difficult to leave the Marquise's house anytime soon if she goes outside. She will immediately run into Yurta. What a hopeless situation. Deciding that she needed to eat and talk to the butlers about postponing her dismissal, she got up. Before Rosie could do anything, Emily burst into the room asking how she was feeling. After greeting her friend, Rosie assured her that she had rested yesterday and felt fine, but her complexion said otherwise. Having decided to find out the news at the mansion, Rosie was horrified when she learned that the second young Master Gertas would be staying there for some time. "What are you planning?" Sir Count Gertas's assistant asked in bewilderment. Yurta noticed that the assistant's face was wrinkled, as if he had not slept, to which he replied that it did not matter now, mentally asking who it could be because of. He was more interested in why the gentleman suddenly decided to stay in the Marquise's house, whether something had happened last night, and Yurta replied that he didn't need to know that, but he still had things to do. The assistant had been working for the young Count for a long time. He understood that something had clearly happened, and he needed to be on his guard. "Aesel, you have work," Count Gertas told him mysteriously. "If someone doesn't want to come back, then we need to make sure they have to come back." Ella, as usual, took up her duty and stood quietly at the door of the cell, when the one who was inside called her. "Maid, would you mind fulfilling one of my requests?" The monster smiled radiantly at her. The girl was so taken aback by the friendliness emanating from him that she even asked what his request was. The young man returned to her a basket of peeled potatoes, each with a smiling face carved into it, and he asked to boil it thoroughly and give it to the pink-haired lady servant. "And don't forget to say it's from me," the terrible monster asked. When the maid left to fulfill his request, Richard decided that it was time for him to go and meet the maid himself. The day was completely ordinary, except that the sun was hidden behind the clouds that covered the sky. Emily suggested that Rosie take a little more rest, but she didn't want to inconvenience others, and if she continued to rest, she wouldn't get paid. Besides, since Yurta is here, he will definitely be watching her, so it's better not to hide, but to behave as usual and observe the situation. On the way they met Ella, who asked how Rosie was feeling, and then she gave the girl a basket of boiled potatoes, which puzzled her quite a bit. "The monster asked me to tell you, eat and be healthy, Rosie." The girl smiled shyly. Rosie pulled the towel off the basket and stared at the contents in surprise. All the potatoes had smiles carved into them. The last time she and Richard saw each other, she refused to help him escape, so why then does he hand her potatoes with smiles carved into them? For the umpteenth time, the girl wondered if he was really normal, not even imagining what was happening to him at that moment. A deafening explosion of unprecedented force was heard in the basement. When the dust settled, Richard, surrounded by blue flashes of magic, emerged from the destroyed chamber. Finally, he broke the shackles. It was not in vain that he suffered and studied this collar. Once the blow from the magical pain has leaked out, people will soon come running here. He needs to find that maid quickly. If she had listened right away, he wouldn't have had to work so hard. Even though it was an impulsive proposal, he was willing to do anything for her if she would help him. If only she would agree to always be by his side. When she's around, she suppresses his terrible magical pain, and of all the people Richard has met, she's the most useful. Even though his proposal was rejected, he expected it. The distance between them cannot be closed even if he reaches out, and he does not like it. If he gets out of the dungeon and escapes with that maid, their distance will easily be shortened. Well, let's go quietly after our capricious servant, the young man smiled to himself, although no, perhaps it would be more correct to say, let's kidnap her. Meanwhile, all the people in the mansion heard a loud sound. No one understood what the sound was and even assumed that there was a fire in the kitchen. Until one of the workers cried out in horror that there had been an explosion in the basement, the monster had escaped and everyone needed to get to a safe place. Emily told Rosie that they had to leave immediately, but her friend replied that she would check what happened herself and that Emily should run to a safe place. The boiled potatoes fell to the floor as Rosie ran into the basement, ignoring her friend's screams. She had to see for herself that this was all really happening. After some time, Rosie stood in the garden, realizing that Richard had indeed escaped. The prison is in complete disarray and the chains are broken. In the original, he was supposed to be subjected to all sorts of bullying from Arjan and escape much later, but he escaped much earlier. Why, was it because of her interference in the original, because of yesterday's incident, that the relationship between Yorta and Arjan also became tense? Maybe this is a warning from the original that everything will not go as she knows. Suddenly, the girl heard a frightened male scream nearby. The worker sat on the ground and begged for mercy, but the one standing over him reasonably noted that it would be difficult if he was so afraid, although he had not yet done anything. He only asked for an answer to his question: had he by any chance seen a pink-haired maid? While Richard was interrogating the worker, Rosie hid behind the bushes, horrified to realize that he was looking for her. The situation is such that if she runs now, she will be caught immediately. But why is he looking for her specifically? Does he really want revenge? Maybe she was too harsh with him. Meanwhile, Richard explained quite politely that he was in a bit of a hurry. "The stable. I think I saw her heading towards the stable," the frightened worker blurted out. Rosie decided to take advantage of the moment and escape, for which she quietly began to crawl away when the branch under her hand snapped. The worker took advantage of the moment and ran away, his heels flashing, when the monster turned around at the noise from the bushes, and the girl froze in fear. Richard undoubtedly heard her. Everything was lost. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Count Gertas called the house butler. He asked the servant what that noise was. Fram apologized for the inconvenience and offered to check everything immediately. At the same time, a servant knocked on the door, apologizing for the disturbance. He reported that a big trouble had happened. The monster had escaped from the basement. Yorta shuddered when he heard about the monster from the basement, and the butler explained the rumble he had heard earlier with this very explanation. The Count's assistant asked whether he was talking about the Superman that Marquis Avantes was keeping in the basement, but he was wearing a magic collar. He vaguely knew about the existence of the monster from the spies, one of the gifted, like the Master. It seems the Marquis does not want the whole world to know about the monster, but how can you hide something like that? And he had to run away just when the Master was here. An important circumstance was that this monster was rumored to be looking for a pink-haired maid. Yorta immediately ordered his assistant to bring his sword. How dare some monster covet his sister? Yorta cannot accept that she was taken away from him here. Taking the sword that was given to him, Count Gertas decided to find her immediately. "Hey, you better come out the easy way," Richard shouted to the one hiding in the bushes. He then asked if he should come over himself, which horrified Rosie. It seemed that Richard had not yet realized that it was she who was hiding in the bushes, because his voice sounded quite frightening. She decided that if she came closer, he would smell her scent, so she had to run, but the monster warned her at that very moment that if she ran away now, she might regret it later. What should she do if they caught her here? They would kill her. Rosie made up her mind and ran. Richard threw his hand forward and the girl seemed to freeze. She felt sick and dizzy. The air around her was constricting her throat, and it felt like her whole body was being torn apart. Could this really be the power of the superhuman Richard? Rosie screamed in pain, and her scream seemed to sober the young man. He looked into the bushes, thinking it was a rat rustling, but it seemed to be his mistress' servant. The girl lay silently on the ground, feeling that she absolutely could not breathe. And only when Richard allowed her to speak, freeing her from his power, did she greedily take a breath. The young man meanwhile asked why she was avoiding him, and the girl looked at him accusingly, asking if he really didn't know. Richard looked so innocent that Rosie felt like she had yelled at a puppy. He reached out and brushed the tears from her eyes. He approached her, telling her that she shouldn't be so surprised. "As I thought, mistress servant, even when you cry, you are beautiful," he said, gently stroking her cheek. And when he added that he had always only imagined, but seeing it with his own eyes was even better, the girl was horrified. Why even imagine such a thing? He was definitely not normal. "Yesterday, Yurta, today, Richard. What did she do in her past life?" The young man, in a completely happy tone, said that he had been looking for her for a long time, and now they had met. Apparently it was fate, but the girl thought it was more likely an evil fate. "Fate," Richard repeated, letting her go. Completely perplexed, the girl asked why he was looking for her, certain that it was to kill her, but Richard was surprised to hear this. "Because it's fate," he repeated, and asked her not to look at him with such a hot gaze, which again irritated her. "So, I came to pick you up. I would like you to go of your own free will, but unfortunately we don't have much time," Richard said, and Rosie realized that this was a kidnapping. And to her surprise, he extended his hand to her, asking if she would come. Rosie was slow to extend her hand in response and asked what would happen if she didn't take his hand. What then? "I really need you at the moment, mistress servant. I hope you won't make a stupid choice," the man replied. He added to Rosie's surprise that although she had not helped him escape, if she agreed to be with him now, he would shower her with wealth and fame. "Wow, what generosity of soul," the girl remarked. She even thought about turning to Richard to get rid of Yurta, but just as Yurta wants her, Richard wants her for the same reason. Besides, even if she went with him now, she would be accused of aiding his escape, and one day she might die at the hands of Arjan. "Are you planning to run away with a strange man right in front of me?" Sister Yurta's voice brought her out of her thoughts. In the next moments, everything happened so quickly that Rosie barely realized the sound of a sword being drawn from its sheath and a man's hand grabbing her. "Found it." Yurta Gertas, with completely crazy eyes, slashed his sword at the bushes with all his might. To Count Gertas's great annoyance, there was no one behind the bushes. Rosie, pinned to the ground by Richard, realized with horror that Yurta had just cut through the wall. "It seems there is a problem between us, Madam Servant," Richard remarked, and the girl was mentally indignant that he even thought there was any kind of relationship between them. Meanwhile, Yurta thoughtfully examined his sword and thought out loud that the monster had escaped and ended up here, and if he gave it to the Marquis, he would be very happy. "Sister, come here," he called to Rosie, and the girl loudly replied that the gentleman seemed to be drunk again, which is why he was calling her sister. But Richard also heard his words, and with a warning in his voice, albeit with a smile on his face, he said that he was jealous that she was dating another man behind his back. "Sister, while I was gone, you were associating with worthless people," Yurta noted. He pointed his sword at his opponent while he flexed his arms, preparing his main weapon. Rosie found this whole situation painfully familiar. Like the saying goes, when whales fight, the shrimp's back cracks. Unfortunately, there is no one to protect this shrimp now, so it must protect itself. The girl looked around in search of anything suitable for self-defense. And right next to her, she saw something that could help her. She darted to the side and grabbed the object lying on the ground in the blink of an eye. It turned out to be a log, which Rosie held out in front of her like a sword for protection. And the man looked at the warlike girl with surprise. "Both of you, stay away." Rosie was seriously angry and was determined to defend herself to the end. Richard asked with a grin what would happen if they did approach the maid. And the girl confidently declared that if they came up, she would hit them over the head with it. The situation looked quite comical. Two strong men, one with a sword, the other with magic, and a fragile girl with a log. Yurta just grinned and told his sister to hold on tighter, and if the monster came up to him, to hit him right away, but Rosie cut him off, adding that it also concerned him. She needs to end the situation quickly, otherwise her heart won't take it. Turning to Richard, she said that the Marquis would soon arrive here with his knights, so if he wanted to escape, he would no longer have to go alone. "You underestimate me, Madam Servant," the young man smiled. Yurta was the first to notice that something was happening and tried to warn his sister about it, but it was too late. A moment later, she found herself in Richard's tight embrace. That's it, Rosie realized. She didn't even have time to resist. Is it really possible that Richard will drag her away like this? Is this really the end of her freedom and peaceful life? But the man suddenly froze, feeling something that made him stop. The smell, that very smell, the aroma emanating from her, suppressing the pain caused by magic. As he thought, he needed this servant. The man completely surrendered to the lightness that the scent brought, but suddenly he seemed to wake up. He was fully aware that he felt strange, and it scared him to no end. Rosie didn't understand what was happening to Richard, why he had these strange mood swings. "What are you doing to me?" he asked, feeling strangely weak. The girl sincerely did not understand what he was talking about, and besides, she did nothing. Yurta's sword was pointed straight at Richard, but the Count himself also looked very strange. Rosie didn't understand why they both looked like they were in pain. "Sister, I think you'd better come with me," said Yurta, pulling himself together. And although the girl said that she was happy here, the young man confidently declared that she would soon stop liking it here, and she will very strongly and voluntarily want to go with him because only he can protect her. In response to objections that she was defending herself, Yurta said that she had said that before, but she always had a hard time protecting herself. From these words, the girl understood that something similar had happened before, but it turns out she doesn't have Rosie's memory, and she doesn't understand what's happening. "If you refuse, you will regret your choice." The words sounded like a warning, but Rosie didn't understand what it meant. Meanwhile, the knights arrived and found the monster. They instantly shackled the weakened Richard and asked Count Gertas if he had caught the monster. Yurta glanced at the quiet Rosie, who shook her head, then the young gentleman replied that he had done it. So Richard was taken back to prison, and the commotion died down. The gatekeeper who watched over the dungeon was taken away and held responsible for the prisoner's escape. And Ella, who was in charge of serving food, did not escape punishment either. Rosie told the butler that she would like to work more, explaining that her plans had changed. The butler was only delighted because he sincerely considered her a capable servant. The girl sincerely thanked him for his trust and promised to continue to work hard. Fram reported the incident in the garden to the Marquise personally, and he asked how they had managed without the knights. Mr. Gertas, who was visiting the mansion, discovered the monster and helped immediately neutralize and lock it up, the butler explained. This surprised the Marquis. The Count's thoughts were unknown and incomprehensible. In addition, there was a minor incident in a separate pavilion. Rumor had it that after the monster escaped, Count Gertas was looking for a girl with pink hair, and the last maid to feed pointed to Rosie. But another maid argued with great reason that their Rosie had red hair. "Didn't they say she was a redhead? So she is a redhead," said the Marquis of Antes, confusing his butler. Having decided that he was finished with the maid, Arjan decided to take care of his guest. Since Count Gertas took the initiative and helped them, then they needed to give him an appropriate reception and prepare dinner.